Shabbat. Every end of Shabbat at Havdalah, we access him. So we'll talk about that, about why we do meet him. Thanks, Mike. Why we do meet him and why he pops up where he does. There is a place where he actually, we'll see today, I think, where he pops up in Yom Kippur, or the story is accessed at Yom Kippur, but we will have a chance to reflect on Elijah today. So this is an interesting class. And as we're now up on Facebook, where we left off last week was this very chaotic time in the kings of Israel. And so King Asa of Judah is king. And during his reign, King Asa is the grandson of Rehoboam. During his reign, which is about like the 900s, beginning of the 800s, or no, the end of the 900s, the beginning of the, wait, that doesn't make sense. The beginning of the 890s, let's say. So it's not the 800s. Remember, we're going backwards. we're in the 890s, 870s, that kind of time, BC, but we're about 100 years after King David. So some time has passed, a couple generations have passed from King David, but he's still in the background, and King David is still someone who, and King Solomon are still people who are legendary, but who are people's grandparents would have lived during that reign. And so we're reading about and Reverend Lynn, welcome. We're just getting into the text. King Omri takes over after Zimri, another one of the generals, again, takes part in a revolt against Elah, who is Baasha's son. So it goes Baasha, Elah. I can show the thing again, the timeline, but basically, very quickly, Zimri is king for a week, and then he leads this coup, and then he is in turn killed by the people, the other generals, the other leaders, and then Omri takes over, but Omri doesn't take over by himself. And this is kind of where we left off. The people split into two factions. A part of the people followed Tibni, the son of Ginat, to make him king, and the other part followed Omri. And those who followed Omri proved stronger than those who followed Tibni. And Tibni died, and Omri became king. So for a while, there are two kings of Israel. So there are rival monarchs who are trying to consolidate power over the kingdom of Israel in the north, and Omri is the one who, as it says, becomes more powerful, and he becomes king. So that's kind of where we left off with this now Omri, who becomes king, and this guy actually does become sets up, I wouldn't say a dynasty, but he does become a guy who is, you see it? Yeah. He does become a guy who is, he becomes king, his son becomes king, and we actually refer to it as an Omrid dynasty because it doesn't last through many kings, but it does last for about 100 years. So it's, yeah, that's a good question. Do you need more than one kid to pass it through? It's interesting. Here's why I would say that it's a dynasty, or I mean, why I didn't make it a dynasty. The historians made it a dynasty because when people talk about when Omri is referred to in other texts by other people, and his household is referred to in other for example, in Assyrian text, it says Beit Omri. It says the house of Omri, and so they're actually not talking about Omri. They're talking about his son Ahab, but they call him from the house of Omri. What? I'm not on Facebook? Should be. Sorry if I'm not. I thought I put it up there. It didn't get up. So Omri is, I would say, the founder of a very short-lived dynasty in the sense that there's not a lot of people that follow. Yeah, it says it's on. And so, yep. And then we have, that's where we're going to pick up today. So King Asa is the king in the south, in the kingdom of Judah. And here's what it says about Omri. Resma, if you take it away.
In the 31st year of King Asa of Judah, Omri became king over Israel for 12 years. He reigned in Tirzah 6 years. Then he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. He built a town on the hill and named the town which he built Samaria after Shemer, the owner of the hill.
Yeah, so the place in Hebrew is called Shomron, which sounds a little less like Samaria, or a little bit like a little less like Shemer, the name of the guy who we bought it from. But again, Samaria is from the Greek and Latin. But Shomron is what it's called in Hebrew. Samaria, Shomron. It is where the word Samaritan comes from. The people from Samaria or Shemer, Shomron. It is also maybe one of the reasons why we call this the Omri dynasty, because he actually moves the capital from Tirzah to Shemer, which is something that a powerful ruler does. He makes a new capital for himself. If he has that much power and can build capital, he is pretty powerful. So we do know that he takes power again in this coup of a coup. And so he is, after 6 years, he moves the capital and builds a new city, a new capital. What I do want to make everyone aware of is that we have excavated Samaria. We've excavated it. I wouldn't say as well as we should have, but it has been partially excavated. Shomron, and we have found the palace that this guy Omri built. And it shows significant signs of Canaanite Phoenician style, which is interesting, as we're about to see. Completely makes sense. They found ivory. They found beautiful carvings that kind of attest to this period of about, again, 3,000 years ago. I mean, it's amazing to think that even though we didn't find something from him, we do have extra biblical testament to Omri and to his dynasty, and as I said, in the Assyrian works, to Ahab. So, he's one of the people we can say we have extra biblical record of, meaning, again, outside of the Bible. And we also have the archaeology from this capital. The reason that the area has not been completely excavated is because it is 100% in the West Bank. So Samaria is completely Palestinian territory around there. And interestingly, of course, is that the people who live in the West Bank, who are Jewish, who are settlers, or the people who want to live in that area, who've established outposts and towns and villages, and in some cases cities, they actually refer to the area as Shomron. They don't call it the West Bank. So one of the things that you'll see in modern Israeli discourse is this kind of almost identification of the area. If you call it Shomron, then you are probably, again, a pro-settler or a settler. And if you call it the West Bank, or if you say that it's Palestinian Authority territory, then you're probably, maybe more okay with the Palestinian homeland being in that area. But if you still refer to it as Shomron, it's not a given, it's not 100%, but usually people who refer to it by the term Shomron don't want to have any intention of having that land not be part of a Jewish area, because they're referring to it by the biblical name. That same thing goes for Judea, which we call Yehudah, Judah. That area in the Judean desert and parts of Judah that would be part of a West Bank or Palestinian Authority, whatever you want to call it. I'm not making any statements about it. I'm just saying these are what people call it. The people who refer to it as Judea are also have no intention usually of having that area become anything other than area for Jewish folk. So they actually oftentimes call it together Judea and Samaria. So when you see the terms Judea and Samaria, that's usually by people who have every intention of having that continue to be part of the Jewish homeland. So Yehudah v'Shomron, they actually used to call it, interestingly, for people who didn't want 1 square inch of Israel ever to be given back, they actually used to call it the Yesha Council, which was Yehudah, Shomron, the Aza, which was Gaza. Now, there is no Yesha Council anymore because Gaza was given back. It was given to the Palestinians, or whatever you want to call it, a state or it's not controlled by Israel anymore. So the Yesha Council was the settler council, was kind of the government that the settlers had established to kind of represent them and to, kind of represent them in dialogues with the government, et cetera. They called it the Yesha Council. So this is primarily religious Zionists. I mean, not all, but 90% of the people were religious Zionists who did not want to give up any land. And interestingly, again, Gaza was part of that. Now it's Yehudah v'Shomron, but it was called the Yesha Council. So if you look it up historically, that existed until 2007.
One time that there's still Samaritans.
Yeah, so Samaritans still live not far from here, but not exactly in the area of Shomron. They actually live near Shechem, near Nablus, and that's not far, but it's not exactly in the, I was going to say it's not exact, I'll just show you. It's not exactly in the. So Israel has interesting take on this in the sense that Israel, it's not that Israel says that they're not part of the Jewish community. They feel that they're traditional Israelites. They believe that they've never left and that they're the constant inhabitants of that area. But it's a tough discussion because there are not many of them, and that's part of the problem. I mean, what are you going to do? So Nablus here is where they live. Man, I can't even see this. And then so this is where the Samaritans live today. Yeah, in Nablus. And if you look at, so Nablus is a city. I mean, this is one of the largest Palestinian cities in the area of the West Bank. And here's the border. That's the Jordan River. And then this is the border with Israel. So this from here to here is about, I mean, as the crow flies, it's about 6 miles, 5 or 6 miles from Nablus to there. But nobody from here. And again, you can see if we go over to Nablus, there's Tel Aviv, there's Netanya. So the distance from here to here is the distance from, where we are now to Castaic. But the difference in what's going on is not like, it's not even like, I don't even know how to describe it. It doesn't even seem like you're on the same planet. The political situation, the social situation. This is also one of the larger, Jenin is one of the larger Palestinian inhabitant cities. This whole area here we refer to as Samaria, right? So this whole area is Samaria, and you see it here, we'll say the West Bank, but this lower part here is what we would refer to, and again, the West Bank is all of this area, and down here, right about here, we go from what would be Samaria to Judea. So this is where Hebron is, which is completely surrounded by, again, there's a Jewish enclave there, but that's a Palestinian area. And all of these areas, here's Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank. But, again, just south of Bethlehem, we're talking about, just south of Jerusalem, we're talking about, the suburbs really of Jerusalem. So these are all areas, again, Judea is down here, Samaria is here. So all the areas that we're talking about, really during this period of time in the book of Kings, Tirzah and Samaria, Bethel, which is, I don't even think I can show it on the map, but it's not far from here, right there. There's Bethel. These are areas that are all mentioned here in the text, but they're all in the West Bank. They're all in the West Bank. Very rarely, we're going to see some places that are not in the West Bank in the book of Kings, but 95% of the places that are mentioned are here, which is why when people say this is the biblical heartland of Israel, it is. It is. It's just not where it's not where most Israelis live. Most Israelis live here. From here up to here. And then of course in Jerusalem. So that's where most Israelis live. So that's why, we're talking about these areas. But again, this area up here is all Samaria. We call this Samaria. And this was the heartland of the kings of Israel. This is where we're reading about, and actually goes all the way up to here. This is where this is the area we're talking about with Elijah. We're going to see here, we're going to see here, and we're even going to see, actually, believe it or not, a little up there. So let's take a look. Yeah, what?
That's Lebanon.
Yeah, that's Lebanon, but at the time it was Phoenicia. So this is the area we're talking about, but I do want you to be aware of it. When we talk about Samaria, it's really from the historical standpoint. There are this is a political issue, though, I will say. That's why I brought it up, so you know it. All right.
Omri did what was displeasing to the Lord. He was worse than all who preceded him. He followed all the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and the sins which he committed and caused Israel to commit, vexing the Lord, the God of Israel, with their futilities.
Yeah, so that's not good. He was really bad, and he was even worse than Jeroboam and Elah and Baasha and all those people that came before. He was even worse than them. Again, following in their ways, but even worse. Now, assumingly, what he's doing is, again, he's getting people not to go to Jerusalem. He's having people worship in the northern shrines. That's enough. And it seems like he's pretty successful. So what we could say about Omri is that one of the reasons why he's worse than all who preceded him was because he was more successful than all who preceded him. But they don't like him, and they really don't like him. But if you think he's bad, wait till you meet his son, because this is bad. He's worse than all who came before him, but his son is going to be even worser. He's going to be even worse. Here it goes.
The other events of Omri's reign and his actions and the exploits he performed are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and his son Ahab succeeded him as king.
Well, that's kind of what a dynasty is, right? We don't know much about Omri. We know nothing about Omri. We read about him in 4 lines, whatever. And we learn that when it says that he slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, that also tells us that he died a natural death. He didn't get killed like his predecessor, Zimri. Or Elah. So this is stability. And Ahab takes over as king. And here's what it says about Ahab.
Ahab, son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of King Asa of Judah, and Ahab, son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria for 22 years.
Well, that tells us right away that he reigns for 22 years, which by King, it's not bad. It's not Queen Elizabeth, right? But it's pretty good. 22 years is a pretty long time to reign. It's pretty stable.
More than Chuck.
Could be. Pretty much. I would bet money on that one. But here is what happens with Ahab.
Ahab, son of Omri, did what was displeasing to the Lord more than all who preceded him. Not content to follow the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, he took his wife Jezebel, daughter of King Ethbaal of the Phoenicians, and he went and served Baal and worshiped him.
Yes, so he's really bad. Now, what is interesting about this is it actually gave us a little clue, which is that at least according to what they just said, his sin was that not only did he do what Jeroboam did, which is worship God in the wrong way, he worshiped other gods. Now that's really not good. So he's bad on all accounts because he's not only worshiping the wrong way, he's worshiping the wrong gods. What's interesting, of course, is it says that he married the daughter of the princess of the Phoenicians, the daughter of King Ethbaal. Now, gosh, the guy he's got Baal in his name. He must have been a good Baal worshiper. We actually do read about King Ethbaal in other sources, in Assyrian sources of the time. So we do know that he was a real guy. He was according to the Assyrian sources, a powerful king of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians at this time are beginning to start to set up colonies outside of Lebanon and are starting to spread their Phoenician Canaanite ways, as we talked about. The Phoenicians end up spreading all over the place. We read about Ethbaal there in the Assyrian Chronicles, and interestingly, we read that he's actually a priest of Baal and Asherah. He's actually a priest of, it says, of Astarte, who's the feminine goddess of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites. And remember, Baal is the same god that we encounter amongst the Canaanites. The Phoenicians and the Canaanites are identical people. I mean, it doesn't mean that, they might have called themselves, well, first of all, he didn't call himself the king of, it doesn't say actually the Phoenicians, by the way, in Hebrew. I will say that. It says that she is that she is the daughter of Ethbaal, the Melech Sidonim, the king of Sidon, king of the people of Sidon. Well, Sidon and Tyre at this time were united as one kingdom, as one monarchy. They were city-states that eventually become one fairly powerful city-state. Now they're right on the coast. Tyre and Sidon are off the coast by Beirut, and they are still port cities, and they are supposedly very pretty, or at least parts of those cities were when the places weren't being bombed and destroyed. That Tyre and Sidon were very beautiful. They were major cities up till the time of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great actually laid siege to the city. They had amazing harbor constructions. Again, the Phoenicians end up spreading their tentacles all across the Mediterranean and bring wealth back to Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon are also famous for their murex shells that create that purple dye that was used by the Romans, the Greeks and Romans, and by Israel because of its value as a dye. It was considered a royal color. And so that was another source of Tyre and Sidon's wealth, were these murex shells that we found, billions of the shells off the coast from their dye manufacturing that went on even 3,000 years ago. So these are major city-states, but they didn't refer to themselves as Phoenicians. They referred to themselves as Sidonians or Tyrians. Again, by this point, they're calling themselves Sidonians, or at least the Bible's calling them Sidonians, but they're again, we call them Phoenicians, but they probably consider themselves, well, we call them Canaanites. There is no difference between the people of Phoenicia and the Canaanites that are in the land of Israel. There was no border. There was no border between Lebanon and Israel. Sometimes King David and King Solomon's kingdom extends all the way into that area. Sometimes their kingdom extends all the way into Israel. The border is very fluid. And because they're Canaanite culture, they're Canaanite cities in the land of Israel, there's like no difference. We don't know the differences really, how pronounced the differences were between Israelites and Canaanites. There's the theories go all the way from the fact there is no difference between Israelites and Canaanites to they were very different, and they were culturally and ethnically and genetically very different. There's different ends of the spectrum there, probably somewhere closer to the middle, but the Canaanites spoke a Hebrew language, a Hebrew dialect that was completely understandable to the average Israelite. They spoke the same language, had the same pottery. They worshiped the same gods as we're about to see, because the Israelites are also worshiping Baal. And it seems like sometimes the Canaanites might have been worshiping our God, calling it a different name. So there's a lot of intermarriage, as we see here. There's a lot of mixing back and forth. And the difference between a Canaanite and an Israelite were not maybe as pronounced as we'd like to think that they were. Based on the text we're about to read, it doesn't seem like there's that big of a difference. We like to say that there was. The Bible definitely likes to give us the idea that Canaanites are horrible people. But the fact that we might be a little bit more Canaanite than our ancestors would have liked to admit, I don't know what to tell you other than Judah married a Canaanite woman named Tamar. We've talked about this before. So every Judite, at least going back to Judah, has Canaanite blood in them through Tamar. So there are Canaanites a part of the Israelite mix for a long time. And Jezebel, who we know just by name, that she's not a good lady, is the daughter of Phoenicia. She ain't no lady. All right. So she gets her husband to worship Baal right away. And again, were there Israelites who said, what's the difference? You call him God, we call him, Yud-He-Vav-He, Lord, whatever you want to say, Hashem. You call him Baal. He's the same God. He's the God of water. He's the God of rain. He's the God, makes the thunder. You hear him up in the sky. He's the God who gives us life. What difference does it make what you call him? Well, as we're about to see, the Israelites are going to be, they'll be reminded that there is a difference. So this is the setup for what we're going to read today. This is about Baal worship and how at least we, respond to this, or at least Elijah responds to this. So keep all this in mind. Keep the Bible referencing back to different places and different points in time. Everything is connected. So let's take a look at Ahab.
He erected an altar to Baal in the temple of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made a sacred post. Ahab did more to vex the Lord, the God of Israel, than all the kings of Israel who preceded him.
Yeah, that's why I said he was worser, because he was even worse than his dad. And so he built the temple to Baal, which is bad. And then he also made a sacred post, which you can see right here is an Asherah. So this is, this is the sacred post, the Asherah post, which the Bible specifically says you never are supposed to make. And he does it. So he's worshiping these other gods. He's making shrines to them. And he's even establishing these Asherah sacred posts. I will tell you before you get all mad at Ahab, I mean, you should be mad at him, but there are Judite kings that do exactly the same thing. So as much as the Bible here is telling us that Ahab does it, we will read that there are kings of Judah who will do exactly the same thing. As a matter of fact, we read that Solomon erected shrines. So we already actually read it, that Solomon was already erecting shrines, and there were Asherah shrines that were being done in Jerusalem during his time.
But this was written by the people from the South.
It was definitely written by people in the South. And so they have no issue telling us that he's a horrible person because he's doing these things. But again, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And they've even, we've even read that. But, Solomon at least built a temple to God. This guy doesn't seem to be doing anything other than building temples to other gods. So here's other stuff, some other stuff that goes on with his time before we finish this chapter.
During his reign, Hiel the Bethelite fortified Jericho. He laid its foundations at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set its gate in place at the cost of Segub, his youngest, in accordance with the words that the Lord had spoken through Joshua, son of Nun.
Yeah, so what are we talking about here? So this guy, Hiel, it says he's from Bethel. He refortifies Jericho. So Bethel and Jericho are not really near each other, but he goes and he refortifies, he rebuilds up Jericho. Now it says that he did it at the cost of Abiram and his one son, his second son, Segub, that they died. Now, some people say, well, it sounds like he sacrificed them, like it was a human sacrifice, right? Right? That's pretty much, again, what some people would have thought just by reading it. But you have to remember, again, this is all reference here. Joshua said in chapter 6 of the book called Joshua, "Cursed of the Lord be the man who undertake to fortify the city of Jericho. He shall lay its foundation at the cost of his firstborn and set up its gate at the cost of his youngest." So Joshua didn't say you're going to sacrifice your kids. It says your kids will die if you do this. So it's called the curse of Joshua. So Jews were not supposed to build Jericho. Joshua said, never rebuild this city. I want this city to be laid waste to. They never want to see anyone live in the city again. That's what Joshua said. Now, Joshua said that to some extent because Jericho was the first great conquest of the Israelites, of Joshua. So if you rebuild it, you go, hey, look how great, Jericho's a great city. 50 years later or whatever, it becomes a great city. Where's the city that you laid waste to? It's not there anymore. It's a beautiful new city. So the only way you can really have a testament to your great victory is to leave it in ruins. And they did that with people. There were cities that they did that to. The Romans did it with Carthage, right? You lay waste to it. You sow it with salt, supposedly, again, as part of the ritual, so that no crops can grow there. And, you make sure that no one can ever build there again. It's a testament to destruction and your greatness, which, by the way, is an interesting situation, because how do we create memorials? How do we create a place where we, on one hand, want to recognize the loss and death of that place? Obviously, the monument at Pearl Harbor is one of those, but that's an easier one because it's over water. But what do you do at 9/11? We just remember the 21st anniversary 2 days ago of 9/11, right? We didn't rebuild over that place. We left those as holes. Now we built all around it. And of course, we built an even taller building next door, as if to say we will not be defeated, right? That was the part of the psychology of building that tower, was to say we're going to build up even bigger. So on one hand, we wanted to commemorate the place as a place of destruction, and not to desecrate the memory of the people who died there. But those are our own people. And so then the tower next to it is a testament to rebuilding and to saying we're not going to be gone. But the people of Israel who rebuild Jericho are literally saying to themselves, no, we got to rebuild Jericho. And they're basically going against their biblical ancestor who said, don't ever rebuild that city. And they just went against it. And they did rebuild Jericho, and Jericho did continue as a city. And for a long time afterwards, it was a city. And there's only a few hundred years where it's not an inhabitable city, if you will, because Jericho is one of the most continuously inhabited cities in the entire world. There's people that live in Jericho that we've excavated that go back 9,000 years, 8,000 years or so of almost continuous inhabitant of Jericho. So ironically, it is one of the most, it's right by the Dead Sea, right? So it's the oasis right as you come to the Dead Sea. So it's a major point of connection. I'll show very quick. Back to Santa Clarita. There it is, showing where I've been lately. Not very exciting. Hold it a second. Okay. All right, so yeah, you can see Yard House in Eden. It'd be embarrassing if it was like a strip club that you just were at.
Got to be careful.
You have that in a search engine. It's not very exciting. It's very not very exciting. No, I was looking up where Izium is in Ukraine too. Shows you what, you know, how much fun I have. No, so so here's Jericho. Jericho is right here. And so we call this the Jericho Road, which goes from Jerusalem to here. Which is the road that takes us down to the Dead Sea. And so what's important about Jericho is that it's a oasis that's along this route, along the Jordan Valley, along the Jordan River. And so the Jordan River is there. And when you cut across to Jerusalem, that is the, you know, that's like the point of connection to the, well, it's not long. So it's only about a half hour by road now, but it used to be a fairly windy road going up the Judean mountains. And yeah, it kind of, by the way, this area right here kind of separates Samaria in the north from Judea in the south. So this is kind of like actually almost like the border, if you will, between those two areas. Back from the kingdoms and even today, you know, what we call Judea and Samaria. So this road right here was called the Way of the Kings. It went up from the Red Sea down here, all the way up to all the way up to the Fertile Crescent through Damascus, and then across the Fertile Crescent into, along the Tigris Euphrates River here. So these towns that are still here, like Tadmor, which was called Palmyra in the Greco-Roman period, important places, homes. This was the path that people would take to get, trade from there to there, or from here, from the Mediterranean, they would either cross across here, or they'd cross across Jerusalem to the Jericho Road and go up to here. So these were all ways that people would get across the Mediterranean in those days. This was the Way of the Sea, was along here. That was the Way of the Sea. And then this was the Way of the Kings, called the Way of the Kings up here. So those are, and again, everything that's green is where you can actually have, food. And that's why we call it the Fertile Crescent, because it goes from here to here, and you can't go across here. So you die if you go across here, but you can live and eat and survive if you go across here. So it's a long way to go from Baghdad to Jerusalem along the Fertile Crescent, but you can't go the quick way. Well, you can now. Well, actually you can't, because you'd probably get captured and kidnapped and whatever. But if you could drive, you could drive it right from here to here. And it actually wouldn't be that far. If you see, it's about, 300 miles or so, 400 miles as the crow flies. But yeah, it's not a drive that any of us are going to be doing anytime in the near future, unfortunately. Anyways, so that gives you an idea of why Jericho was such an important area and why people wanted to establish a place there. It was good business. So again, the reason that this part is here at the end, it's a good question, because this has nothing to do with the previous line. I mean, it has to do with the previous line. It has nothing to do with the previous rest of the chapter. So as you can see, is it really talking about Joshua, or is it talking about Ahab? We don't really know. The Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. That's a weird line, right? Oh, that's Joshua. I went back to Joshua. I'm sorry. Where is that from? That's Joshua, actually. I want.
You're in Joshua. You went back to Joshua to
Yeah,
show
yeah.
us what
That's
that
not
curse.
Joshua. That's not the line here. It's right here. You guys are making me nuts. The text is right
We're
here.
making you nuts.
It's our fault, right?
What's
You're
this?
making nuts.
Here's a lie. This is the text I wanted to get to, guys. Here it is. Elijah. Come on, read this, Rosemary.
All right. Elijah the Tishbite, an inhabitant of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding."
So before we move away from that opening line, Rosemary, if you read Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, it doesn't actually say yet he's a prophet, but we know he's a prophet. It says Elijah the Tishbite. Based on what you just read, what would you say that is?
A place.
Correct. That's normally the way it is in the Bible. Problem is, there is no place called Tishbi in the Bible. We don't have a place called Tishbi. Gilad is a place. It says he's from Gilad. So what is Tishbi? We always say he's a Tishbite. Like maybe there was a place in Gilad that we never found that was called Tishbi. Tishbi is not a place. It's a thing. It's a person. It's a kind of person. A Tishbi is probably a sojourner or somebody who wanders or who's in a place for a certain period of time, but was not living there all the time, but he lived in this area, but he wasn't from that area. Yeah. So the problem, yeah. So it's even worse. See, that's the problem, right? So, here it says from a land, from the city named Toshav. The problem is Toshav is not a city. So the word isn't even translated here. It says Vayomer Eliyahu Hatishbi, Mitishbi. It actually says it 2 times. It does not explain what this is, which means that somebody didn't really know what this was.
Said it twice, so they would be like, or I say it, the more they would be reaction.
No, it's probably was probably a scribal error at some point, but Hatishbi is not a Hatishbi would literally mean the sojourner. Mitishbi would mean he was from that place. It probably was originally Hatishbi mi Gilead, who was from Gilead. And again, Gilead is in the modern day Golan Heights on the other side of the Jordan River. It's part of Israel that Israel conquered before they came into the land of Israel. They got permission to live there. Moses and God gave them permission to live in Gilad. And it's connected, as we said, to the land of Israel, but it's not originally part of the land of Israel. It's weird, right? So we don't really even know where he's from. Oh, it's part of the Jordan and it's part of the Golan Heights. So a lot of Gilad is in the Golan. So I'll just, again, show you real quick. It's a part of Golan. And the part that we don't know where he was from. I mean, we don't know what part of the Gilad he was from, because Gilad is this whole area. So the Golan Heights, which goes from here down to here. And then this area here still would have been part of Gilad. So this is part of Jordan, but this part here was also part of Gilad.
So big, there could have been a town at one time.
There could have been. People have thought, hey, maybe this is where Tishbi is, but we've never found it. So there's people who say, well, maybe he was from here, maybe he was from there, but we've never found a place called Tishbi. So some people say it's kind of in this area. But yeah, this is,
Next time you see Elijah, why don't
we ask him, where are you really from? What's interesting about this, what interesting about Elijah is he's so mysterious. We don't even know where he's really from. We don't really know where he's from, which is part of his kind of myth or his legend, is he's not really from anywhere. And we don't really know anything about his parents, which is interesting because normally when we are introduced to a prophet, we learn who his father was. We don't know anything about his father, which is why we can have legends about Elijah that he was not really a person, that he was an angel. We don't know. But the problem is he definitely doesn't seem like an angel, and that he needs food and water, as we're about to see. And he also seems to have, I don't know if we would call it psychological problems, but he has extremes to his his personality that manifests themselves in strange ways, including, by the way we were just introduced to him. Because what it just said is, he goes to Ahab, the king, and says, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding. But it doesn't say anywhere there that God said there's not going to be any rain. He said there's not going to be any rain. Now, in all fairness, he can't do that without having the power from God. But it doesn't say God said to him, go to Ahab and tell him there's not going to be any rain, which is the way we normally have a prophet acting. The prophet is told, hey, until you get your act together, until you repent, we're not getting any rain. You're not going to get any food. You're going to die. Whatever it's going to say, you're going to be defeated. He doesn't say that. He says, you're not getting any more rain. Now, right off the bat, this is the first moment we've met him. He's basically saying, I'm holding back the rain. We don't know that he really has the, we don't really know how that works, but he pops out of nowhere and he says, as the Lord God of Israel lives, the God whom I serve, there will be no rain. That's what he says. And we don't know that he's ever met Ahab before, based on this. We don't know if anyone's ever met him before, which is why we don't know that anyone is listening to him, Reverend Lynn. We don't know that anyone even is paying attention to him when he says it. Well, they're going to listen to him because what he says is going to happen. So we know he's a powerful prophet because what he says happens, as we're about to see.
The word of the Lord came to him. Leave this place, turn eastward, and go into hiding by the Wadi Kerit, which is east of the Jordan. You will drink from the wadi, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there.
So this is the first time that we actually hear God talk to him, and God tells him to leave that place where he is, which assumedly is in Samaria, which is where King Ahab is, and go to a Wadi Kerit, which is on the other side of the Jordan River, maybe close to Gilad, where he was from. We think maybe this is the area that he knew. And he goes there and he drinks from the Wadi, which is a river valley. It's an arroyo. It's a place where there could be water or there could not be water. Depends on the rain. As we're about to hear, we're about to see, we just heard there's not going to be any rain. But he gets to drink from the Wadi, and he has a miracle, which is that God has ravens feed him, which is pretty miraculous. It's pretty weird. I don't know that I want to eat raven. Yeah, I don't know that I want to eat food given to me by ravens, but look, it's a miracle because ravens don't normally share their food with people, which is they regurgitate their food. Yeah, a lot of birds do that, yeah, but they do that. And one of the interesting things here we see again is that ravens don't seem to be bad in this. As a matter of fact, they're doing God's bidding, and they seem to be helping. They're helping, at least in this case. And we know that they're carrion birds. We know that they eat whatever they want. But here they're actually taking care of Elijah. And we also read about ravens before during the flood, and that the raven goes back and forth until the flood recedes. Now, some people kind of mistake that to say that the raven doesn't seem to want to land. But there's a theory that, at least in one of the Noah stories, the raven actually helps the waters recede. So the idea that ravens are bad, well, Poe didn't really help he didn't help their reputation. They definitely come across kind of creepy there, but they are not necessarily bad in the Bible. What? Satan, the devil in Ohio? No, I haven't seen it yet, but Shira watched it. I will tell you that, are there ravens in it?
Yes, there.
Okay, so ravens, yes, usually get lumped into really bad stuff. I will tell you there's nothing in the Bible that says that ravens are bad. I just want to tell you. As a matter of fact, every time we see them, they're helping. It kind of goes against our thought process that they're bad, but every time we see them in the Bible, they're actually doing good stuff. And we do know that ravens do care for their young. They do seem to actually be protective of them, of their community and whatever. But yes, they get a bad rap. But here they are, they're doing God's bidding, taking care of him by the Wadi. So this is, yep.
Say that suspicion is that the introduction of Elijah has been lost.
Interesting. So your commentary, Reverend Lynn just shared that we're missing something. It is possible because we are introduced to him as if we know who he is. And there does seem to be something like, how does he have this kind of credibility to come before Ahab and just start doing this? And the fact that we don't know who his family is, but it did say who he was. And so that's where we kind of go, well, what is with this? And of course, this is what leads to Elijah's mystique and his reputation for being something that is not normal. He's not a person that is like other people. So he is, we'll talk about later how he pops up. But pretty well. So here's a little miracle. God likes him. God's taking care of him, or at least God wants to take care of him. But we don't know, by the way, that he had any authority to do what he just did. But he seemed to get away with it.
He proceeded to do as the Lord had bidden. He went, and he stayed by the Wadi Kerit, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and every evening, and he drank from the wadi. After some time, the wadi dried up because there was no rain in the land.
And there was no rain in the land because he said there was going to be no rain in the land. He may have actually caused this drought. So he was now dealing with the effects of not having rain, the rain that he said wasn't going to happen. Again, he seems to be powerful. He seems to be protecting God. He seems to be on the right side. But does he have any authority to do what he did? And is he acting a little?
It's a bizarre story.
It's going to get weirder. It's bizarre so far, but it hasn't even gotten bizarre yet. It's going to get even crazier. Yeah, bizarre. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
And the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have designated a widow there to feed you.
So that's an interesting thing. Get out of Israel now and go up to Phoenicia, go up to Sidon, right? Which seems like that's going into the enemy country, but you're going to go up to this place and there's a widow there that is going to feed you. That's kind of weird because, again, he's being fed, he's being taken care of, and now he's being told to go somewhere outside of the country to be fed.
So he went at once to Zarephath. When he came to the entrance of the town, a widow was there gathering wood. He called out to her, "Please bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink."
Okay, so he finds the woman. He does what God says. He finds the woman.
As she went to fetch it, he called out to her, "Please bring along a piece of bread for me." "As the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am just gathering a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. We shall eat it, and then we shall die."
So she has no more food. She's preparing her last meal for herself and for her son. And she says that we're going home and we're going to eat it and then we're going to die because we have no more food. This is it. This is our last meal. So this is very strange. Again, you could argue the consequences of this drought.
But traditionally, widows don't have anything.
Yeah, no, so the fact that she'd be without food makes sense. She's in the most precarious situation of all. Her son's going to die. But there's a real question here. Is Elijah the one who's responsible for this situation? Did God, we normally say, well, God sent him there to help. Well, we'll see what happens. Let's finish the story before we get there.
"Don't be afraid," said Elijah to her. "Go and do as you have said. But first, make me a small cake from what you have there and bring it out to me. Then make some for yourself and your son."
So she just told him, I have no more food except for enough for me and my son. And he says to her, make it for me instead. Wow. So this is a really weird story. Yeah, yeah, we'll read that.
Going ahead of us.
But here, let's read it. Let's read it.
For thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the ground. She went and did as Elijah had spoken, and she and he and her household had food for a long time. The jar of flour did not give out, nor did the jug of oil fail, just as the Lord had spoken through Elijah.
Yeah, so she did what he said, which was a
It's
great
like a
act,
fairy tale.
right? A great act of faith. What?
Fairy tale.
Yeah, it's like a fairy tale. And of course, the miracle is that the food doesn't run out. Kind of like what Jesus does. Yeah, kind of what Jesus does later. A lot of these miracles. Now, in the scheme of those miracles, this miracle doesn't seem that great because only a few people get to benefit of the miracle. It's a pretty small miracle. It's a tiny miracle. It's also a little bit like Hanukkah, I guess, a little bit oil. But this is even less impressive because only a few people actually get to partake of this miracle. But it's a miracle nonetheless. They have food, and it's clearly God's miracle that this stuff doesn't run out. So this is this great basis for the legends that we have of Elijah, that one of the things we know about Elijah is that if he comes to your house and wants to come in for a meal and knocks on your door, and you're not going to recognize him as Elijah. He's not going to say, hey, I'm Elijah. He's going to knock on your door and ask if you can spare some food. And if you say no, it's not going to be good.
Story of hospitality.
Yes.
That never occurred to me before. I don't know why.
Well, it's definitely a story of hospitality. It's a story of faith, of having faith that this is going to happen. And in Jewish tradition, it is reinforced as a story, as a theme that we have of hospitality. Specifically, that Elijah will show up on the eve as Shabbat is coming. He'll knock on your door and he'll ask if he can sit at your table for Shabbos. And if you can spare food for him, then you're going to get crazy blessings, right? You're going to have these beautiful, your food will turn out. So there's all these legends all the way through the shtetl period of people who said, Elijah came to the house and I opened the door and we let him in, and then he took care, whatever. I mean, the people didn't tell the story. They tell that story about somebody else doing this. With their last loaf of bread, their last challah, they fed Elijah, and Elijah blessed them and said, you'll never be hungry. So these stories about Elijah doing these kinds of things forever, kind of is a lesson. It's a cautionary tale. Make sure if someone knocks on your door that you let them in and you feed them, because that person might be Elijah. So look, your incentive should be that you should be hospitable. But if you're not going to be hospitable, and if you're worried about it, listen, there's a story in the Bible that tells us as a basis for this, that even if it's your last crumb, you're going to get a miracle. So this is why, again, Elijah will continue to make these appearances, or people believe that he'll come. We're still not at Elijah coming to your cup for your cup of Elijah. We're still not there yet. We're still not there about coming to the Seder, because believe it or not, that's not what this is about. That's the cup of Elijah has nothing to do with this part of it, really. Because, by the way, it's not that, you're not showing your hospitality. I guess you could say you are. I mean, that has nothing to do with it. Giving wine to somebody was not considered to be enough to sustain them. That's a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing. It's a nice thing to give someone wine and make them happy, but it doesn't sustain them. It's not food. So if we gave Elijah a piece of matzah, which I would never do, I would give Elijah something nicer than matzah. But yes, I would say, but it's not food. And so the drink, we'll talk about why the drink for Elijah, why the cup, why the cup for Elijah, if you will. We will get to that. But this is where we get the legends of Elijah coming to our homes and taking care of them. Or again, if you It's not quite the passing on the street business yet, but
Scripturally, isn't this an odd position for the story to come in?
the story, because,
Well, we've just been going through Kings.
yeah, oh yeah,
and zap, we're now
yeah.
in-
And now we're in a story. Yeah, this story of Elijah, as I said, is so out of character. You weren't here when you came, when we went into, we've been reading about these kings, and just like the last couple chapters is this king and that king, and and they went to war against this king. That's about all we've had. We haven't had any discussions. We haven't had any narrative. The Elijah stories, these few chapters of Elijah, this is the end of the book of Kings. And it was almost as if it was a separate text that was put into the book of Kings because it took place during this time. One could argue that maybe all the rest of the book of Kings is to get us to this story, because this story is really the story, and maybe why, again, because we don't really learn a lot about the kings, is what happens when, God is essentially has to get involved. So that's the story of the food. That's not the weird part. Here's the weird part.
After a while, the son of the mistress of the house fell sick, and his illness grew worse until he had no breath left in him. She said to Elijah, "What harm have I done you, O man of God, that you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son?" "Give me the boy," he said to her, and taking him from her arms, he carried him to the upper chamber where he was staying and laid him down on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord, my God, will you bring calamity upon this widow whose guest I am and let her son die?" Then he stretched out over the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, saying, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life return to his body." The Lord heard Elijah's plea. The child's life returned to his body, and he revived. Elijah picked up the child and brought him down from the upper room into the main room and gave him to his mother. "See," said Elijah, "your son is alive." And the woman answered Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord is truly in your mouth."
Okay. So that's the story. That's the story. It's the first time we've ever read in the Bible of anybody being brought back to life. Of course, this will be an important miracle for Jesus to do in his lifetime, to bring someone back to life, because to some extent, you better be able to do that because Elijah did it. And so if Jesus doesn't bring someone back to life, I think there's a question of whether he's even as good as Elijah. So this is very important in the Jesus stories of the miracles that he will perform, which is that he has to re-perform these miracles, especially the miracles of Elijah. And very interestingly, in a very important part of the story of Jesus, he actually, in front of his followers, his disciples, actually meets Elijah. Meets Elijah and Moses. It's called the Transfiguration. And the scene where Jesus, Moses, and Elijah are together is almost a recognition that Jesus is now part of that pantheon of people, which only makes sense to Jews. What? Correct. Yeah, a little bit like the Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader is there too, by the way. The interesting thing about, there is an element that they wanted to go with that, which is they're almost like glowing, and they tried to make it like these people are now, part of this pantheon. It's weird that's, look, if we lived during any other time, but today, people would say, that picture in the church of the 3 of them together, which there were a lot of pictures of the Transfiguration, where you'd have the pictures. It was very powerful pictures in the Middle Ages. I mean, you can see it in the Prado. I mean, you can see them everywhere. You'll see pictures of Moses, Jesus, and Elijah. But he becomes part of this group of people who can do these miracles and who does things like, again, as Elijah just did, revive somebody, which Moses brings his sister back from illness, but he doesn't bring her back from the dead. So there's a real question again of how powerful Elijah is, and is he really almost like an angel? Because he seems to do things that human beings don't normally do. But it doesn't say that he's an angel. It says that he is a man of God. It says a man of God, and Isha, Ish Elohim. Sometimes Ish Elohim, a man of God, is translated as almost like an angel. But oftentimes, again, an Ish Elohim is literally a prophet, a person who's there on behalf of God. And here it says, again, you're speaking God's word, which is interesting because it's almost as if she says, yeah, that miracle of the food that never ran out, yeah, that was pretty good. But now I know you're really a man of God. It's a weird thing because, again, like, did she need more proof? Exactly. But it seems like she does need more. It
Well,
seems
I
like,
think she was doubting when her son got sick.
correct. And that's what Elijah interestingly says to God. He actually says to God, oh Lord, my God, will you bring calamity upon this widow whose guest I am and let her son die? So he literally says to God, you can't let this happen. It looks bad. It looks bad for me. It looks bad for you. You can't do this. Now, what's interesting, of course, is what she says to him in the first place. What harm have I done you, O man of God? And she called him a man of God there, right? That you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son. So what's interesting here is that she feels to some extent that she is responsible for his death. And that, I think, is an interesting thing, because she doesn't just say, my son, what have I done that you're going to kill, that my son is going to die under your watch? She could have said that, but it says here, recall my sin. So what is going on here in this that she says that? And so, look, there's commentary that, the son was, there was some infidelity that she was involved with, look, she's already a widow. So is she, and did she?
That far from a prostitute.
Exactly. So, and why is he living there with a widow? Like the whole thing is kind of maybe is a little creepy. But look, we don't assume that Elijah seems so strange. And by the way, according to the traditions, not so much the Jewish traditions, but definitely the Christian traditions, 100% celibate. They do not like the idea ever that Elijah does anything bodily like a human male would do. They don't like that at all. That he is 100% celibate, that he never has sex at all, never has children. Exactly. Or with the woman. So that there's nothing going on here where he's like, has any human needs whatsoever. So this idea that Elijah almost is like a hermit and lives like with the, in the wadi, and we're going to see later all the places he goes where he's kind of on his own, that Elijah is not a normal person in the sense that he doesn't seem to operate like a normal person, but he does need food. He does need water. So the idea of him being an angel is a little tough to imagine, in the sense that he definitely seems to be of a human body, but it doesn't say he has children. It doesn't say he has a wife. Other prophets we know do have children and wives. So he could have. So this woman, by the way, who's living in Phoenicia and in Lebanon, not in the land of Israel, seems to believe in God. She seems to be an Israelite. It doesn't say that she's an Israelite, but she calls him a man of God. She does say your, exactly, right? She says your God. But again, Jacob says that, he calls, it says to his dad, your God, gave me, so, saying to somebody, your God, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not my God, but it's almost like affirming the God that you believe in. Yeah, so we don't know that she doesn't have that faith, but we don't know what she says recalls her sin. Now, what's interesting about it is, I think, more of a modern interpretation of this. What is the sin that she actually maybe engaged in? Was she going back to actually kill her son and to end his life with like the last meal that they were going to have? Like, was there an act of euthanasia coming that we didn't know about? Was her sin simply giving up? The fact that she told Elijah, we're going back to die. All of those things, people kind of have read as maybe a more modern interpretation of this, which is that what's going on with this woman, that she's actually doing a sin, that she lacked faith, that we don't know her name. And But she, yeah, and that we can't be too certain of because we're going to get a lot of women that we don't know their names. But she's the widow of Zarephath. We don't, we know her as the widow of this place.
Husband's name.
Don't know her husband's name. Don't know the boy's name.
There wasn't.
Now, here's the problem, my friends. We don't know the boy's name, right? We don't know the boy's name. And the fact that we don't know the boy's name leads us to all types of possibilities of who this young lad is. And there is a theory, or there is a midrash, or there is a story that we love because we want to know these people. We want to know who these people are. That this young boy will become Jonah.
Oh.
So here's Jonah. Now, if Jonah, we know his father, his father's name is Amittai, but it doesn't say anything about his family. We don't know exactly what happened, where they were from, but what if this was, actually a baby who winds up being a prophet too. And a prophet who in many ways is very much like Elijah, who doesn't seem to interact with people in a normal way. Yes. Yeah, because as we're going to see time and time again, Elijah has no issue condemning people and in some cases wreaking havoc with his proclamations. Because if you think about it, this boy was going to die months ago. At least according to the mom, he was dead already. So what's interesting about this is that she actually said in the text, we're going to die. My boy is dead. Now he dies. And she is freaking out because we got to bring him back to life. Well, you could make the argument, Elijah could have said, hey, I gave him extra life. He was supposed to die months ago, but yet he's dead, which is a really interesting thing that we never consider in this story. Well, we usually don't consider. What about all the other boys in all the other towns during this whole famine that are all dying, that have died during this last period of time that Elijah has condemned the world, or at least his part of the world, not to have any water? Elijah literally just got confronted with death in his own home, and maybe this is my modern interpretation of it, finally has a sense of what his actions actually did, because now he sees the kid die in front of him, and now maybe he's become attached to this kid. Maybe he actually now has a sense of what a normal human interaction is like, and he actually says to God, "Not, I care about this kid, but don't let this kid die because it doesn't look good." But now maybe Elijah understands what he's doing.
A question about a number of things, but celibacy.
Yeah.
That's not a holy thing in Judaism.
No.
And it's interesting that it is in Christianity.
Yeah.
Especially early Christianity. Is that a great thing?
Well, so the celibacy issue becomes an issue in Judaism by the time of Jesus, because the Essenes, or at least some groups of Essenes, were committed to celibacy. And I say some groups because it doesn't seem like all groups of Essenes were celibate, but there were some that were. And the guys that were living at Qumran that were writing those scrolls, according to what we believe and what they wrote, what Josephus wrote, they didn't have women as part of their community. So they were living celibate, hermetic lives. There is a basis for it in Elijah's behavior. And so there are prophets who we don't read about having families. Interestingly, the rabbis generally do not look well on those kinds of situations, because I think the rabbis recognize that makes people do things like this, which is have no concern for their consequences. They don't think about kids dying because they don't have kids. Now, again, that's a simplistic way of looking at it. But if you live in this world where the world is ending, and all that matters is doing the right thing and worshiping God, and I don't have to. From what we know about Elijah never had a day job, right? And so he doesn't have a wife who's, needs to take care of food. Like, he can go get fed by ravens. So he seems to be if not a hermit, at least live like a hermit for part of the time. The only relationship, long-term relationship we ever read about, we're about to read about, is with his disciple Elisha. So we never read about, and even that doesn't seem to be a really whole or normal relationship. But he doesn't seem to really interact with other humans in a way that we would say is, a loving relationship, or, have any bonds with other humans. But in this case, again, he restores this child to life. He's able to do it, and it's a miracle, right? It's according to this, God responded to his prayer. There's nothing like, hey, let this kid live, I'll die, I'll give him there's none of that. He just says to God, this, will you bring calamity upon this widow whose guest I am? She's taking care of me. Don't let her son die. Yeah, it doesn't look good. And it's almost as if he still doesn't fully get it, because he still doesn't really say, hey, look, what about all these other kids that are dying in other homes right now because they don't have food? So the next line literally says,
Much later, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go, appear before Ahab, and then I will send rain upon the earth.
so you can see right here, the 3rd year of the drought. So here's the note, right? It says the 3rd year of the drought. Let me just see. Yeah. So now it doesn't say here God said it's going to be 3 years that you're not going to have any rain, but it does say that God says it's time to go back to Ahab. He says, go appear before Ahab. So here,
Thereupon Elijah set out to appear before Ahab. The famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab had summoned Obadiah, the steward of the palace. Obadiah revered the Lord greatly. When
this is all
Jezebel,
part of a parenthetical comment about Obadiah. Here he is.
when Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them, 50 to a cave, and provided them with food and drink.
Yeah, so Jezebel, it says right here, didn't just set up her own Baal worshiping altars. She does away with the competition, and she kills the prophets of Adonai, of Yud-Heh-Vav. It says specifically that the people were worshiping God, which, by the way, means that the people were worshiping God in the north. So no matter what anybody said before, at least according to this, there were prophets that were living there, including Elijah. And while this was going on, there were other prophets that were being murdered. But this guy, Obadiah, who's part of the royal family, the royal court, is a good guy. He's one of those insider guys who's a hero. There's a lot of those guys in the Christian stories too, who are doing the right thing, even though, they're Romans or whatever. They're protectors. They're people who are actually doing the good thing. We don't see them a lot in the Hebrew Bible. Actually, when we start to get them, obviously you can't get them until you have kings, anyways. But they are few and far between. And this guy, again, seems to be a very nice guy. His name is Obadiah, which means a servant of God, a servant of the Lord, of Yud-Heh-Vav, Obadiah. And he goes against his king. And then, of course, he's risking his life doing that. He could be killed easily for doing that.
and Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the wadis. Perhaps we shall find some grass to keep horses and mules alive so that we are not left without beasts.
Which, by the way, is kind of a weak thing to say. Like, we have people dying, but let's make sure that our animals are okay, right?
Well, but aren't they needed to bring in crops and?
You could say that, other than the horses, the mules for sure, but the horses generally are needed for one thing and one thing only.
Chariots.
Yeah, for warfare. Yeah, they don't need horses. They're not betting on them at Santa Anita. They are using them for warfare. So this is how we keep the people in their place by having an army.
They divided the country between them to explore it, Ahab going alone in one direction and Obadiah going alone in another direction. Obadiah was on the road when Elijah suddenly confronted him. Obadiah recognized him and flung himself on his face, saying, "Is that you, my lord Elijah?"
So Elijah was at least recognizable to Obadiah. He knows who he is. And he sees Elijah. Here, Elijah wants to be seen by him. It's not like Elijah's hiding. It says Elijah confronted him, got in front of him. And Obadiah's reaction is to throw himself on the ground and say, "Oh my gosh, it's you, Elijah. Eliyahu, it's you."
"Yes, it is I," he answered. "Go tell your lord, Elijah is here." But he said, "What wrong have I done that you should hand your servant over to Ahab to be killed?"
So he says to him, "Go back and tell him I'm here." And he goes, "Well, if I do that, I'm going to get killed." Right? I'm a good guy. Why are you getting me killed? And again, it's an awesome line that Elijah says to him, which is, "Go back and tell the king Elijah is here. Hine Eliyahu, here I am. I'm Elijah and I'm here." And Obadiah goes, "That's not a mission I want to do." Right? And here's what Elijah says to him.
"As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom to which my Lord has not sent to look for you. And when they said, 'He is not here,' he made that kingdom or nation swear that you could not be found. And now you say, 'Go tell your Lord Elijah is here.' When I leave you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you off, I don't know where. And when I come and tell Ahab and he does not find you, he will kill me. Yet your servant has revered the Lord from my youth. My Lord has surely been told what I did when Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 of the prophets of the Lord, 50 men to a cave, and provided them with food and drink. And now you say, 'Go tell your Lord, Elijah is here.' Why, he will kill me."
Yeah. So he says, I even think Ahab knows what I've done. Right? Now, Jezebel, interestingly, it doesn't say that Jezebel knows what he did. But he says, Ahab, he says, "My Lord has surely been told." Actually, he could actually be speaking to Elijah here
I
too.
thought he was kind of speaking
Yeah,
to
He
Elijah.
could be speaking to Elijah here too. But he's
But
making
you know
sure
I'm
that
a good
Elijah-
guy. Why are you making me do this?
Yeah, he's for sure making Elijah know, I've been doing good things while you've been gone. And but I'm not sure about that actually.
Mhm.
Because I've looked at it before as my Lord has surely been told what I did when Jezebel was killing the prophets, Lord, how I hid 150 men to a cave and provided them with food. And now you say, "Go tell Elijah why he will kill me." So I kind of read it as him saying, "Look, you already know, Ahab has to know what I did. And when he hears that I came into contact with you and didn't bring you back, he's for sure going to kill me now." So like he already is suspicious of me and now he's going to kill me. Well, whatever. The bottom line is, Obadiah says, "I can't do this. I can't go back and tell him that you're here. I can't do that. I will get killed if I do that." Now, here's what Elijah says to him.
Elijah replied, "As the Lord of hosts lives, whom I serve, I will appear before him this very day." Obadiah went to find Ahab and informed him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah.
Wow. So Obadiah does what Elijah says. He goes and tells Ahab, and Ahab goes out to meet him. He goes out and to meet Elijah. So this is the confrontation between the king and the prophet. Now, if you've never read this story before, you'd probably wonder, how's this going to go down? We don't know that much about Ahab, but you know that he does what his wife tells him to do.
Much bad because
And he's not, well, because his wife is not a good person. It's killing prophets of God. But let's see what he does.
When Ahab caught sight of Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?"
Right. So that's Ahab's opening line to Elijah, which is, "You're the troubler of Israel. You've brought trouble to us." Listen, but look, he recognizes that Elijah is responsible for what's happened. So at the very least, he's saying, look, I know you're the cause of this.
He retorted, "It is not I who have brought trouble on Israel, but you and your father's house, by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and going after the Baalim. Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, together with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table."
Yeah. So this is the challenge. And this is what we're going to finish with today. The duel between Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Ahab sent orders to all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you keep hopping between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, and if Baal, follow him." But the people answered him not a word.
So Elijah calls this showdown between himself and the prophets of Baal and Asherah at Mount Carmel, which is at modern day Haifa. And he says to the people, again, this phrase, "You're going between two branches, bows." Kind of like birds hopping back and forth between two branches. You got to pick a branch. And it seems to be an idiom that was known in those days. So he says, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep going back and forth, which implies that the people, of course, are going back and forth. Right? And the people don't say anything. They don't say, well, that's not really true. They listen to what Elijah has to say. And to some extent, they recognize that this is what they've been doing. They've been playing a game. Sometimes they worship God and sometimes they worship Baal. So here's the challenge.
Then Elijah said to the people, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, while the prophets of Baal are 450 men.
Well, by the way, we know that there's 100 prophets in a cave, 2 caves, that have been saved. But as far as the people know, those people are dead and there's no prophets left. So Elijah's saying, hey, there's me and there's 450 prophets of Baal. Now, by the way, it said back up here that there were 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. When we don't see them. It says, Elijah said, bring them there. So they're not there. The prophets of Asherah are not there. There's the 450 prophets of Baal. So that we don't know exactly why they're not there anymore, but they're not there. The Asherah prophets are not there.
Let 2 young bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up and lay it on the wood, but let them not apply fire. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and will not apply fire. You will then invoke your God by name, and I will invoke the Lord by name. And let us agree, the God who responds with fire, that one is God. And all the people answered, very good.
Yeah, they said, Tov hadavar. That's a great idea. Good idea. We like it. That's what we'll do. We'll do a showdown between the gods.
Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one bull and prepare it first, for you are the majority. Invoke your God by name, but apply no fire. They took the bull that was given them, They prepared it and invoked Baal by name from morning until noon, shouting, "O Baal, answer us!" But there was no sound, and none who responded. So they performed a hopping dance about the altar that had been set up.
Yeah. Now I will say that there's a weird thing that happens here, which is it says that they got to pick whatever bowl they wanted. And then it says they took the bowl that was given them and prepared it. Now, we're not exactly sure why it seems like they didn't get to choose the bowl when it says they're going to take the bowl, or, but here it says they took the bowl that was given them. But it does seem like it, however they did it, when they make their sacrifice, they go around the altar. Well, they shout at the altar. Baal answers. They don't get anything. And then they start dancing about the altar. And this is, and this is supposed to be something that we don't actually know what this was, but they're starting to get more and more into it because they can see that this is not going well. Now, remember, assumedly, these people are praying at Baal, are speaking in Hebrew. They're shouting out to God in Canaanite/Hebrew, which is what they prayed. And the prayers were probably very similar. God, hear us. Seems, pretty similar to our prayers. And these assumedly are Israelites doing it. These are Baal priests, either that were, again, brought down by Jezebel, but their Jewish Israelite audience is here worshiping, and they've been doing it for a while. At least according to Elijah, they don't seem to deny it. So they're doing a hopping dance, but that's not enough.
When noon came, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Shout louder. After all, he is a god, but he may be in conversation. He may be detained, or he may be on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and will wake up."
Well, now Elijah's just making fun of them. Because he says, look, maybe your God's busy. Maybe your God's away. Maybe he's in another conversation with some other gods, or maybe he's asleep. Perhaps he's even in the bathroom. They're definitely making fun of Elijah, is definitely having a little fun with these people. It says he mocked them. And so he says, maybe you need to be a little louder. You got to bring it up a notch if you want to get your gods to listen, right? So
they shouted louder and gashed themselves with knives and spears according to their practice until the blood streamed over them. When noon passed, they kept raving until the hour of presenting the meal offering. Still there was no sound, and none who responded or heeded.
yeah, so it got pretty crazy because the hopping didn't work, the screaming didn't work. So they start cutting themselves open. They start whipping themselves assumedly with blades and knives. And this is a pretty violent way to pray, but according to tradition, at least according to the Bible, that's the way people prayed to Baal. And this is unfortunately the way that they pray to God. And this is not a way that we pray. According to the Bible, this is not the way we pray. But it is still done in areas very close to the land of Israel. These are Ashura practices going on in modern day Iran and modern day Lebanon. This is the holiday of Ashura. So whipping ourselves with knives and swords goes on right now. Do you really want to see a picture bigger? Okay, there you go. How about that? She asked for it. I wasn't gonna.
I said, thanks, Mark. Now you can make it go away. Thank you.
Did not need to do that. But I do want to tell you that self-flagellation is still very much part of the rites in those countries. And of course, there were Catholic practices that involve self-flagellation and
No, nice.
with pretty spiky stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to watch what's it called again? The Da Vinci Code. There's a little scene where Paul Bettany as the crazy monk is whipping himself with stuff, and sometimes people would have Rosemary. You know about this stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's even in the Three Musketeers.
What?
I said it's in the Three Musketeers when Aramis, he has one of his periodic, I'm going to go and be a priest again, or finally, and he says he's been using a whip on himself.
Yeah. So sometimes people would wear kind of,
Hair shirts.
yeah, they would wear shirts with,
Or they would wear hair shirts.
yeah, they would wear prickly things, and sometimes they'd wear prickly things that were metallic that went into their skin. So yeah, these are all suffering for the sake of God. So these are not, completely remote practices in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, obviously, but they definitely are not Jewish practices. And so this scene of these people cutting themselves up for their God is insane.
Did the flagellation, monks doing flagellation, was that after they came in contact with the Middle East?
Oh, good question. So did people do this after they came into contact with the Middle East, like during Crusades? It predates the Crusades. So part of it has to do with the suffering of Jesus.
But it
So
was-
it has less to do with, it has less to do with these kind of rituals than more to do with the suffering of Jesus. The furthest that Jews get into this, by the way, because self-flagellation was considered to be problematic because it leaves scars and things like that, which you're not supposed to do. The closest thing that we have to this in Jewish tradition is fasting and deprivation of joyous things to people so that they would stop eating for days and days and maybe eat on Shabbat, but then,
We symbolically beat our breasts on Yom
yeah,
Kippur.
on Yom Kippur, but it's more to feel that we're actually, that we're not supposed to hurt ourselves. So this is this was seen already as an early problem because again, it says as they did, right? And so this was their practice, according to their practice. So this is pretty tough to hear. I mean, they're gashing themselves, which means they're bleeding all over the place, but nothing's happening. And here's what happens.
Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. He repaired the damaged altar of the Lord. Then Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Around the altar he made a trench large enough for 2 seahs of seed. He laid out the wood and he cut up the bull and laid it on the wood.
So he makes his altar an altar that had been used, right? And it says specifically here, it was a damaged altar of the Lord, which means it was an altar that they had been worshiping God on, which they weren't anymore. So he takes 12 stones, which are the 12 tribes, and he rebuilds them. But then around the altar, he makes a trench large enough for two seahs of seed, which was, so again, is this an area where 2 seahs of seed would be sown? Again, this is an altar that's now surrounded by a trench, a hole, pit around it, a moat. What's important about this moat is what he's going to do. So,
And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the burnt offering and the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. Do it a third time, he said. And they did it a third time.
So this is what he needs the trench for. He's pouring water all on top of the burnt offering, on top of the altar, on top of the wood. Now, some people have said it wasn't just water that he put in there.
Maybe it
But-
was gasoline.
Yes, that it was, some type of, but it seems as though it's water. These people are doing it, so they could have seen it. Obviously, this is being done so that he can do something really, really impressive.
Back up, I think we missed a line.
I'm sorry.
The water ran down around the altar, and even the trench was filled with water.
Yeah, so there's enough water here so that the trench is filled with water.
When it was time to present the meal offering, the prophet Elijah came forward and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, for you have turned their hearts backward.
Wow. So this is the line that it says, well, here it says Hebrew, meaning of Hebrew uncertain, but it says, Hasibota et libam achroni, which is, again, seems to be that their hearts or their minds are turned backwards. But it assumes here that you, God, have turned their hearts backwards or their minds backwards. So here Elijah's basically saying, they seem to be following the wrong way, and you're their God, so what's happening here? So it's almost as if God is saying, you have to fix this. Well, obviously, when he says this, he's also saying, of course, I'm only doing God's work, which means the last 3 years of famine, that wasn't me. That was God. What you're seeing here today, this challenge, this isn't me. This is God. I am doing these things at your bidding. And that's what he says to God in front of the people. So he's saying this in front of everybody. And he's saying, God, it's time for you to show your stuff. And here's what happens.
Then fire from the Lord descended and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When they saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, the Lord alone is God, the Lord alone is God.
Yeah. So this is a miracle, and it's a miracle at a level that we haven't seen a miracle since maybe you could say when God fills the temple, when Solomon builds the temple about 100 years ago. You could say that this is that kind of a miracle. Very good, Mike. So Mike got to the part that I was going to say. We do say this, you got it. You said this is what we say at Yom Kippur. This is the last thing that we say at Yom Kippur. So we say these words, Adonai Hu Elohim, 7 times. We say it 7 times. Here they said it twice, but we say it 7 times at Ne'ilah, right at the end of Ne'ilah. So I said, we don't really invoke Elijah at Ne'ilah other than, we have a tradition of doing Havdalah at the end of Ne'ilah, but it's not the Shabbat. If we do Havdalah, that's because we do Havdalah. Originally, there might not have been Elijah the prophet and those kind of things done at the end of it. But for the sake of this discussion, the last thing we essentially say at Ne'ilah, the last thing we say at Yom Kippur is Adonai Hu Elohim. We repeat what these people say, which is, yes, God is God. God is God. And that's what they're saying. The Lord alone is God. Adonai Hu Elohim. They're saying the Yud He Vav He is the God, which essentially is saying what the other thing they could have said if Baal had won was Baal Hu Elohim. Baal Hu Elohim. So that's what I better not say that, by the way. Something bad could really happen to me by saying that. So I better say Adonai Hu Elohim right now, real quick. But they say the right thing, which is that God is Elohim. Now, what's interesting, or the Lord is Elohim, I should say, because Elohim means God, and they're saying the Yud Hey Vav Hey, our God, the God of the Bible, the God of Exodus, the God of our ancestors, is the God. And they translate it here as alone is God. What does the King James say, Mary? The word Ha Elohim is the God. And that's why they would say alone is God. But Ha Elohim is the God, which means, again, Elohim we talked about before is a plural word, but here it's clear that the word Elohim is singular, that they would have said it singularly. Adonai is the God. Or again, would they have said Adonai Elohim? Doesn't really make sense. So Adonai Ha Elohim, can translate it as the Lord is the God, the Lord alone is God. God is God, Adonai is God. These are what we say. Now, well, let's think about why we say that in 1 second. Well, let's finish reading it before we say, why is that the last thing we say?
Then Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not a single one of them get away." They seized them, and Elijah took them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there.
Wow. So that's the way the whole thing ends, right? The whole thing ends, well, it doesn't, that's not really the last thing, but they killed all these prophets that Jezebel brought in. You can imagine she's not going to be very happy. This is her stuff. This is her thing. But it's not the last thing that happens, because they kill the prophets of Baal. They all live happily ever after. Because
Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a rumbling of approaching rain." And Ahab went up to eat and drink. Elijah, meanwhile, climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, crouched on the ground, and put his face between his knees.
now that's an interesting scene to imagine. Elijah crouching down on the ground, putting his face between his knees. It's kind of a weird scene. And what happens here?
And he said to his servant, "Go up and look toward the sea." He went up and looked and reported, "There is nothing." 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." And the 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising in the west." Then Elijah said, "Go say to Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you."
So this is the last part of this, which is not that they killed the prophets of Baal. I mean, well, the first thing, of course, is that God proves with the fire that that's God. Now, by the way, why do we say that maybe he was playing with fire, or at least something that can make fire, like gasoline or naphtha, something like that? Because Elijah will later on go up in a chariot of fire. And one of my rabbinic teachers told me a long time ago, it seems like Elijah knows how to use fire stuff. And if there were prophets or magicians or people who knew how to use fire, they could make fire appear that it's coming out of water. And that maybe what Elijah did at the end of his life was actually go out on one of his shows, which is he got blown up at the end of his life. I don't know. I mean, that seems a little too far-fetched for me, but it's possible, because if Elijah is playing with fire, as we say, there is this, there is something that happens here, which is the opposite to some extent, which is the miracle of this rain coming, because there hasn't been rain in 3 years. Sounds familiar, right? And then all of a sudden there's rain that's coming down, and Elijah basically has his servant go tell Ahab, "You better get in your chariot and go back home to Samaria," which is not right around the corner from where he is. It's, miles. It's 25, 30 miles, 40 miles from, he's got to go through the Jezreel Valley to get back to Samaria. So you better get in your chariot, you better get in your car and go back, because it's about to rain. And now, he's seen one cloud, but Elijah knows that this is the miracle. So the miracle wasn't the fire, really. I mean, that was a little miracle compared to what's happening now, because
Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. There was wind, and a heavy downpour fell. Ahab mounted his chariot and drove off to Jezreel. The hand of the Lord had come upon Elijah. He tied up his skirts and ran in front of Ahab all the way to Jezreel.
Now, this is a crazy scene. I remember in my illustrated Bible as a kid, this picture of Elijah running in front of the chariot with his legs up, with his kind of skirt up as he's running in front of Ahab's chariot as the rain is falling. Now, this is a crazy scene because at this moment right here, it appears that Ahab actually gets it. And this is what people forget about this story, is that at least for a moment, Ahab appears to have gone back to the right side. And we'll read one line or two lines from here.
When Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had put all the prophets to the sword, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "Thus and more may the gods do if by this time tomorrow I have not made you like one of them."
So what happens? Ahab goes back and tells his wife what Elijah had done and how he killed all the prophets. Again, the ones that she had hired, the ones that she had brought in to be the new religious leaders for the Israelites. And her response is to Elijah, "I'm going to kill you tomorrow. By tomorrow, you're a dead man." So Ahab goes back to his wife and tells her this. Now, what's interesting, of course, is what did she say to him? She says to Elijah, "I'm going to kill you." But what does she say to Ahab, her husband? We don't have that part of the conversation.
That's nice, Jared.
Because if she's that upset that she's going to kill Elijah and send out that message to a guy who just, she has no fear of Elijah. She has no fear that this guy who just pulled off the end of a 3-year drought, even if she doesn't believe, maybe if she says, "Oh yeah, you used some trickery to get this fire to come down from the sky." Okay. But he just ended a 3-year drought. So now she doesn't care. She says, "I'm going to kill that guy." But what did she say to her husband? Because she must have said to her husband, "How could you let that guy live? What are you doing? This guy just destroyed all my prophets. And you didn't do anything about it?" So we can only imagine. We can only imagine what she said to her husband and what that conversation was like when he came home and said, "I don't know, the famine's over, drought's over. We're going to have food. Oh, and by the way, we killed all your prophets, honey. They're all dead. We took them down to the Wadi Kishon and we slaughtered them all." That must have been an interesting conversation with his wife. That's all I can say. And she doesn't seem to care. So Jezebel is a very interesting character. And she's one that, again, while we don't know the names of other women in the Bible, and we learned hers, she doesn't seem to have had any fear of what Elijah could do to her. And interesting woman. That's all I can tell you, is that she's an interesting woman who, as we're going to read next week, we'll read about how she dies, how she goes out, because you don't mess with Elijah. And this is you'd think she would have learned after what, she would have had a little bit of chastisement or humility after watching or hearing about what happened, but she doesn't seem to have. So an interesting lady, definitely not one that we want to behave like, but this woman is interestingly known as a Jezebel. The connotation of a Jezebel is not what the Bible portrays her as, right?
She's portrayed as a woman that leads men astray.
Correct. That's what, when you say,
What she does.
well,
They haven't tricked
but usually it's done sexually, right? So normally when we think about a Jezebel, I don't know, what do you think of when you hear the word Jezebel?
But how do we know that she didn't lure Ahab? to misbehave sexually. We don't know that she didn't use her.
I know, but that
every
doesn't seem to be, let me just look. Somebody give me what is the textbook definition? What is the definition of a Jezebel? The Merriam-Webster is a impotent, shameless, or morally unrestrained woman. Well, it really doesn't have a connotation sexually, but the synonyms are, well, these are not even words that we use anymore, but floozy, hussy, minx, tramp, trollop, wench. These are all synonyms. Chippy, by the way. When was the last time you used the word doxy? Yeah, these are all sexual, but those are all sexual. Well, I didn't give you the other one here is the word hoochie. No, the word hoochie. Hoochie is used here. Hoochie is used here too. Yeah. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, all those seem to have sexual connotations to them. But they really don't. I mean, she really doesn't do anything sexual.
That we know of.
Yeah, we know of. Okay.
How is she gonna,
So,
how else is she can't say, I'm not gonna make your favorite foods. They have.
okay,
other
but
people to
but
do
but,
that.
but in all fairness, Judith,
What is she
in
gonna
all
do?
fairness, she's the princess, she's the queen of Sidon. So she's a powerful enough woman in her own right. Okay, but I'm not sure that her marriage was definitely one of political alliance, right? We know that. So this is a political woman, but she seems to be very, look, I'm not making excuses for her, but I don't think anything that she does is necessarily, that I see at all, as being sexual. What I see is her being a scheming woman. I see her being impudent, but I see her being I see her being obviously very religiously misguided, but she really doesn't do anything.
But is that assumed, given
Given
the religious tradition of women not being
you-
able to
you-
sing
listen.
in front of men?
You can say that, but she seems to be a very powerful woman in her own right, who is strong enough to tell her husband, I'm going to kill this guy. And he doesn't, he's, as much as he seemed to have been in the moment, pretty happy with what happens, which is the end of this drought. And the idea too, that Elijah is running in front of his chariot seems to be almost saying, look, I'm leading Ahab. Ahab is coming behind me. I'm running with Ahab and nothing's happening. He's not hurting me. He's not trying to get me. I don't know. The scene is a weird scene. There's no question that Ahab seems to have at least been recognizing Elijah as a true prophet in this moment. But as soon as he comes home, he tells his wife, and his wife says, that's not what we're doing. So she's, again, I find her to be an exceptionally powerful woman, one who, none of those words would be the words if I read this story the way I read it, the way it's there. None of those things about her being sexually whatever. I don't get that. I get the fact that's not, so the word that we use today is saying this woman's a Jezebel. It's like she's a hussy, I don't see that at all. I see her literally being a woman who says, I'm not going to tolerate any of this. He killed our prophets. He's undoing what we're trying to do in this kingdom. And, we're trying to be like my father's kingdom in the north. We're trying to be more like the Phoenician, the Sidonians, who are very powerful. Let's get our act together. What do we need this? What do we need this crazy prophet for? So I think she's again, you could say she's scheming, but she seems to be a very tough lady. She seems to be a woman that you don't want to mess with. She seems to be in control. And if anything, she is the real power in that house. Yeah, and you can make the argument, this is her culture. I mean, I'm not making an excuse for her. Believe me, I'm not saying that Jezebel clearly she's the evil person in the story, as you're about to see. She gets her comeuppance, by the way, too. Don't worry. Don't go to sleep thinking that Jezebel's not going to get,
I'm gonna be grateful.
Jezebel's not going to be,
Thank goodness.
Jezebel's not going to get it. But the way she gets it too is kind of like what a bad king, the way a bad king would die, not the way a harlot would be punished or necessarily, again, seen as her primary thing being sex. That's all I want to say is I think the term has become not what it should be. Anyways, folks, enough about Jezebel. We want to end on a happy note, which really that wasn't a happy note. It was a happy note. The Dodgers are closing in on 104. I want them to win 114 games. That's all I want. You don't have to win more than 114. No, then they're 700. Then they're 700 club. All right, folks, have a great rest of the week. And as we get ready for Rosh Hashanah, finish the year strong. And Shana Tova, everybody. Happy New Year. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Shana Tova.